So trying to spin a bright spot on that. Do you have pet projects or things that are exciting you for going forward?
I think we have exciting things going forward. The first exciting thing is, for the first time this year, having gone up and down the state myself, talking to bar associations and attorney groups and just stakeholders, people who have an interest in the branch, including the business community, I've been able to convey the idea that we really need to come together and fight to keep the courts open. Every Californian has an interest in keeping the courts open to resolve all of the issues that are coming down the pike on wage and hour, mortgage fraud, loss of services, cutbacks. So we have, for the first time in a long time that I can even remember, a coalition of attorneys on both sides of the fence, plaintiff and defense, both sides of the fence, criminal and prosecution, who have come together on an open courts coalition to actually lobby the legislature about adequate funding for the courts. And I brought certain groups together, not for judges to be involved in that group, because the attorneys really need to speak to the legislature about how important it is that courts are open for your clients that are really the public, and the judges are doing the same thing. So that's a bright spot. We have a plan, we're moving forward, we've been meeting many, many times. In terms of pet projects, I don't have any because it's just not an opportunity in this fiscal year and in fiscal year 12-13 to launch a pet project. But I do have initiatives, which are always new because I'm new. So my initiatives are really simple, and that is, to keep all courts open statewide, from the two-judge court in Alpine County of 1,200 people to Los Angeles, which has 600 judges and 10 million people. It also, that's one initiative. Another initiative is to coax courts into the 21st century. We cannot further deny that young lawyers and law students coming out of law school are more electronically experienced and gifted than we are. That is the wave of the future. We should be online, not in line. We should have 24/7 access electronically. And I want to say, I realize that we have fiscal constraints better than anyone. But I also think we can't lose sight of what the branch has to do moving forward. So I call that coaxing ourselves into the 21st century. I also know that we now have, as the judicial branch, 19 million square feet. We are now the owners, caretakers, landlords of 532 buildings across the state. And a beautiful example of that is the Pittsburgh Harness and Justice Center. This time last year was dedicated. The courts are in control of that. We need to make sure there's safe structures for the public that comes there. I just recently read that San Bernardino settled a lawsuit for a big chunk of change because it wasn't ADA accessible. We, the judicial branch, we need to fix that. It's our responsibility to do so. And so one of my initiatives is to continue to keep an eye on the fact that we need to keep a roof over our head. Well understood that we are in fiscal crisis. Another probably major initiative for me this year is finally understanding that the judicial branch is a branch. We are composed of judges, justices, and lawyers and court staff, and that we should be advocates for ourselves. We as an institution, with your help, we solve people's problems. So we should be the best advocates for ourselves. We should take our collective experience, which is similar, our similar education. We are the only branch of government, compared to the other two, that are similarly educated and experienced. We are in the best position to fix ourselves. We are in the best position to find our solutions. And a perfect example of that, at least in Contra, Costa County, is the Elder Court by Judge Cram. It's innovative, it's forward-looking, it serves your community, and better yet, it's a model for the rest of the state. That's not something that comes out of the legislature, folks. That comes out of you finding a need, getting to group together, making it a go, and making it ours. Another example is Orange County. They came up with a combat veterans court because of all the military armed services they have in Orange County. And that doesn't come from the legislature. That comes from the needs of your community, a court that's responsive, lawyers who are willing to make that work that serves the community. So that's what my initiatives do.
That's a lot. Now, from an attorney or practitioner standpoint, are there things that we can do? Are there paths we can take? Because this is all our livelihoods too, and we're all very passionate about making the courts work for us and for our clients. So, do you see anything that we can do in that process?
I do, and you have been. And Contra Costa County, the judges in your county have been instrumental in speaking up about the needs for your courts and the need for the branch, because that's a need for the public. What I found after being in the legislature this last year, talking to legislators, is that they understand the problem in a very clinical way. They understand that courts are closed and there are long lines, and lawyers and judges and staff are doing much more. But what they need to hear from you who they know, from legislators and Assembly and Senate side, from you, people in their community, that there are real stories. And what this means is when you cut the budget and Contra Costa County has fewer resources, how it impacts the people in your community. Legislators need to know that. When I go there and tell them about this, it sounds very clinical. But they need to know from you the real story. They need to know from you that your cases are taking twice as long. They need to know from you that you can't get set for trial, or your motions are being sent out months in advance. They need to know what it's doing to the public you represent. And the best way is through a story, a narrative, a phone call. Because they have a lot of decisions to make. They have a rough job. But they have to understand that the judicial branch enforces freedoms and democracy. And if you begin to shut us down piece by piece and limb by limb, it really injures individual and collective rights.
Thank you. And by the way, there was some, I got an email requesting these kinds of stories and narratives to be submitted. So if there are stories that you want to provide and get them to the right place, I can help with that. And I'm sure that you know what I'm talking about.
I do know what you're talking about. We've sent out a directive to county bar associations and to the bar and to different trial associations and even to victim groups to find out, how is this impacting you personally? Do you know something that we can tell to the legislature about how this is really affecting, how the budget crisis is affecting citizens or people who need to get into court? And was it yesterday or the day before yesterday, one justice is holding hearings up and down the state. They're holding 4 hearings that are public hearings to focus on access to justice and what the budget cuts have done. So they had one public hearing in Sacramento at the McGeorge Law School, and business was there to talk about how they need a stable court system to resolve business disputes. So the next one is November 30th in San Francisco. 2 more will be in Los Angeles, I think Southwestern Law School and Irvine, where it's an opportunity for people to tell the real story. And the One Justice is a coalition of business groups, bar associations, nonprofits. I believe the Attorney General's office is involved and the Supreme Court's involved.
So in talking about access to justice, you addressed quickly, my passion is the overwhelming court, and I agree, we're cutting edge, and Judge Cramp's done a phenomenal job with that. The other part, in my view, that's critical in access to justice is the issue of diversity. And in not just the community, but also specifically in the pipeline. And getting people of color to be more likely to go to law school and onto the bench. Is that something that you've been addressed? It has to be as part of your career.
That's right. I've had the opportunity to meet and have dinners with bar associations, and many bar associations have diversity as one of their main goals or one of the reasons they even formed in the first place. So just to give you an idea of how important diversity is, you have to look at the last census in California. And so what we know in the last census in California is that we have 10 million immigrants. And we know how valuable immigrant input ideas are to California. We also know from the census that we are now a minority-majority state. No single minority in California is a majority. which is very interesting that we do not have a majority ethnic group, period, across the board. So that tells you how diverse we are and how potentially segmented we could be if we don't begin to reach out and bring in all of these groups to be representative at all levels of government. We also know that half of California is women now, or close to that. And we know the bar exam, we show women are 49%. So not only am I talking about diversity, do I talk about gender and racial and ethnic, but I'm also talking about cultural and experience, because every bench needs different practitioners of different experience to better inform the bench. So if you think of that background, and then we think of the closest information we have from the state bar. I'm aware of 2 surveys the state bar did, one in 2001 and one in 2006. In 2001, the state bar sought to determine the demographics of its membership, and they determined that 17% of the state bar in 2001 claimed an ethnic minority group. 5 years later, in 2006, the state bar undertook another survey where they looked at the demographics of its membership. They found that it was declining, that it's now 15.6% in 2006. I understand the state bar may be doing another survey about the demographics, because I just think they have to be different now. When I look at the composition of law schools, I just have to believe the numbers are up, but we don't have any evidence that indicates that. And that's important because the bench looks to the bar to fund, feed, supply, stock the bench. So if you're talking about diversity, right, you've got to look at what the state bar numbers are and what that diversity is. So in terms of the bench now for, I'll just say, ethnicity on the bench and gender. We know from our latest study, which is recent, that I think it was 2006 as well, maybe a little bit later, 31% of the branch of judges are women. 8% are Latino, 5.6% are African American, and 5.4% are Asian American. So again, that's a dated survey as well. I don't think it's as dated as the state bars, but it is something that we need to talk about. Whenever I speak to groups about diversity, it's clear we have work to do. And the reason we have work to do is not only those numbers, but you and I all know that the reason the judicial branch works is because democracy works. The reason democracy works is because it is representative of the people. The judicial branch, probably more than the other 2 branches, the executive branch and the legislative branch, we so depend on public trust and confidence. You know, a good example in my mind is how it is that there wasn't a riot when the United States Supreme Court decided Bush versus Gore. The public lived with that decision, whether you are right or wrong on that, whatever, it came from 9 unelected people. So when you think about how democracy works and how the bench works and how lawyers do their job, you need a judicial branch that reflects the diversity of this state for public trust and confidence, so that they understand that the decision makers look like them, look like us, so they know that we've walked in their shoes, we have the same lens, except our yardstick, our measurement of cases, is in fact the rule of law. That's the great leveler. But in terms of representation, we have work to do. And it starts in the law schools, and it probably starts before the law schools. It starts in colleges. And I had the opportunity to hear Dean Chemerinsky speak at the State Bar Convention in the Diversity Forum, and he delivered some sobering news that colleges, law schools are not drawing very large numbers of African American or Latino students. And he thinks that we need to do a better job in the high schools and the colleges in order to diversify the pipeline.